The rain had been falling for hours, a soft, persistent drizzle that coated the streets and made the air feel heavier, thicker. Inside her small, sunlit kitchen, Sarah stared blankly at the half-empty coffee cup in her hands. The bitter liquid mirrored the bitterness that had quietly crept into her marriage, a slow, insidious erosion of warmth and intimacy that she could no longer ignore. Alex, her husband of 10 years, was somewhere upstairs, probably scrolling through work emails or talking on the phone, his attention consumed by everything else but her. She could hear the faint tapping of his fingers on the keyboard, a rhythm that had become the soundtrack of her loneliness. She had tried to talk to him. She had tried to bring it up gently, subtly, during the rare moments when they shared a meal or a quiet evening. But every time she broached the subject, Alex would nod absent-mindedly, his mind already somewhere else, or offer a half-hearted smile that barely reached his eyes. Sarah had learned to stop expecting acknowledgement. She had learned that the warmth and recognition she once relied on had quietly vanished, leaving her feeling hollow, almost invisible in the very home she had helped build. Today, like many other days, she had a package scheduled to arrive, a small distraction, perhaps, but a reason to leave the house for a brief moment or at least interact with someone who wasn't part of her silent suffering. She tidied the counter, wiped a stray crumb off the table, and straightened a small vase of wilting daisies. The act felt mechanical, but it gave her a fleeting sense of purpose. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Sarah walked slowly to the entrance, pulling the door open to find a young delivery driver standing there, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. He smiled politely, holding a small cardboard box in one hand and an umbrella in the other. There was something in the way he looked at her, a flicker of awareness, something beyond the standard professional courtesy. "Package for you," he said, his voice soft but steady. "Looks like it's been a long day out there." Sarah forced a small smile, taking the box. "Yes, it's been one of those days," she murmured, not really knowing if she meant the weather, the work, or the emptiness she felt at home. The driver hesitated for a moment, then said, "Hey, I don't mean to intrude, but you seem a little down. Everything okay?" Sarah blinked, surprised. No one had ever said that to her in a long while. Alex never noticed. Her friends saw her on social media, smiling in photos, sharing moments of her life, but no one ever asked if she was truly okay. Here, at the doorstep, this stranger noticed something that had gone unseen for years. I'm fine," she said, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. She didn't want to reveal too much, not to a stranger. Yet part of her wanted to spill it all, to let someone in on the quiet despair that had taken residence in her heart. The driver nodded, as if he understood more than she could say. "Well, just know that someone out here notices. Sometimes that's all we need, right? To be seen." There it was, a simple truth delivered with quiet sincerity. Sarah felt a small stir in her chest, a warmth she hadn't felt in years. She smiled, genuinely, just a little, and murmured a heartfelt, "Thank you." The driver tipped his cap and walked back to his vehicle, disappearing into the soft gray blur of rain. Closing the door, Sarah leaned against it, gripping the package. Her eyes wandered to the living room, where Alex's laptop glowed softly on the coffee table. He was there, but not really there. The man she married had become a shadow, a distant presence, who no longer saw her, no longer shared her joys or her sorrows. And yet, the brief interaction with the delivery driver had reminded her of something she had almost forgotten, that she still mattered, that she still deserved to be acknowledged, to be seen. She sat down at the kitchen table, the cardboard box in her lap. She traced her fingers over its edges, feeling the weight of it as more than just a package. It was a symbol, a small anchor in her sea of invisibility. She imagined opening it, letting its contents be a quiet act of care for herself, a gesture that said, even in her loneliness, she was still here, still worth noticing. The rain continued to fall, drumming softly against the window pane, a rhythmic reminder of the world moving forward, even when her own life felt paused. Sarah exhaled slowly, letting the tension in her shoulders ease, if only slightly. She wasn't happy, not yet. But for the first time that day, she felt a faint flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. She knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. Her marriage, her emotions, her sense of self, They were all tangled in years of neglect and silence. But the delivery driver's brief act of noticing had cracked open a door she had thought permanently shut. And as she unwrapped the package, feeling the small weight of its contents in her hands, she realized that sometimes the smallest gestures could begin to heal the deepest wounds. And perhaps, just perhaps, she could begin to find herself again in the spaces her husband no longer saw. The days following the rain felt heavier than usual. Sarah moved through her routine like a ghost, performing tasks with mechanical precision, her mind constantly drifting to the brief encounter at the door. The delivery driver's words had lodged themselves in her thoughts, unbidden and persistent, whispering a reminder she hadn't acknowledged in years, that she deserved to be seen, that her existence mattered outside the walls of a marriage that had slowly erased her. Alex was his usual distant self. He would pass through the rooms of their home, immersed in calls or emails, offering polite nods or clipped words when necessary, but never pausing to notice the quiet ache that had taken root in Sarah's chest. It wasn't that he was cruel. It was worse, he was indifferent. And indifference, she had learned, could be more damaging than anger because it left no room for negotiation, no hope for reconciliation. She tried to speak to him during dinner one evening, carefully choosing her words as if treading across fragile glass. "Alex, I feel like we're drifting," she began softly, keeping her voice even, trying to avoid the tremor that always threatened to betray her composure. He looked up from his plate, distracted. He muttered, barely lifting his gaze from the screen of his phone. "Drifting? What do you mean?" She swallowed hard, the lump in her throat growing larger. "I mean, us. I feel like we don't really connect anymore, that you don't see me or notice when I'm sad or upset." Alex nodded once, absent-mindedly, before returning to whatever had captured his attention. "I hear you, Sarah," he said, but the words were hollow, lacking any real acknowledgement. The weight in her chest deepened, an invisible hand pressing down until she felt small and unimportant. She pushed the food around her plate, tasting nothing, feeling nothing. Later that night, she found herself on the balcony, wrapped in a shawl, staring at the city lights reflected on wet streets below. The drizzle had stopped, but the world still shimmered with residual moisture, a reminder of the storm that had passed outside, and the storm within her heart that showed no sign of abating. She hugged her knees to her chest, letting the chill seep into her bones, feeling a strange comfort in the solitude. The next day, as if summoned by some quiet desperation, Sarah left the apartment earlier than usual. She needed to step outside, to breathe air that didn't feel stagnant with years of unspoken words and unnoticed tears. She walked aimlessly through the streets, her umbrella shielding her from a fine mist that still clung to the city. Her mind wandered to the small interaction with the delivery driver. His simple act of noticing her sadness had been like a lifeline thrown into a sea of indifference. Lost in thought, she didn't notice the driver until he was unloading another package just a block away. Their eyes met briefly, and this time he smiled knowingly, as if silently acknowledging the unspoken weight she carried. "Busy morning?" he asked lightly, handing her the small box. Sarah shook her head, a soft laugh escaping her lips despite the heaviness inside. "No, just life," she replied, the simplicity of the answer belying the complexity of the emotion beneath it. He nodded, not pressing further. Sometimes words were unnecessary, and the understanding in his eyes was more comforting than any conversation could have been. As she walked back home, Sarah felt an unfamiliar mixture of hope and sadness. Hope because someone had seen her, truly seen her, and sadness because the one person she had expected to notice the person she had loved and trusted remained blind to her pain. Returning to the apartment, she found Alex on the couch, his laptop balanced on his knees. He looked up briefly, offered a distracted smile, and returned to his screen. Sarah's fingers brushed the package she had carried in, and a thought struck her. Sometimes the world outside could be kinder than the home you lived in. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about visibility and acknowledgement. How had she allowed herself to feel invisible in her own marriage? How had she allowed her voice, her needs, her emotions to be silently ignored? And yet, the flicker of recognition from a stranger, someone who had no obligation to care, had reminded her that she still mattered. Her thoughts drifted, unbidden, to what life might look like if she sought acknowledgement elsewhere. If she let herself be truly seen by someone who noticed, who cared, even if only in small ways. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. The next morning brought a sense of quiet determination. Sarah moved with deliberate intent, tending to small tasks with an awareness of her own needs. She paused before leaving for work, straightening a photo frame on the wall, adjusting a cushion on the sofa. The world inside her apartment remained unchanged, but within her, something was beginning to shift. And though she didn't know what the future held, she felt the stirrings of a quiet rebellion, a refusal to remain unseen. She had been invisible for too long, and something within her whispered that it was time to reclaim herself, even if no one else noticed. The following days passed with an uneasy rhythm. Sarah moved through her home like a shadow of herself, performing the motions, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the brief encounters with the delivery driver over and over. It wasn't just the kindness in his voice or the gentle acknowledgement, it was the fact that he had noticed her sadness when her own husband hadn't. That simple recognition had become a spark in the otherwise gray monotony of her days. At work, she found herself distracted, doodling absent-mindedly on a notepad during meetings. Her colleagues noticed the distant look in her eyes, but didn't ask questions. Some things were better left unspoken. She couldn't explain the strange mix of guilt and excitement that now lived inside her chest. Guilt for feeling drawn to a stranger's kindness, and excitement because it reminded her that she still had the capacity to feel. By midweek, she found herself leaving the office a little earlier than usual, compelled by the pull of the familiar streets that had witnessed her silent walks. The drizzle that had begun in the afternoon created small puddles reflecting the neon signs above. As she walked, the memory of the delivery driver's warm eyes lingered, as if guiding her steps. Turning the corner to her street, she saw him again, unloading packages at a small convenience store nearby. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the city's chaos seemed to fade around them. "You're out early today," he said, his tone light but carrying a genuine curiosity. "Needed. Air," she replied, almost whispering, though the words carried more weight than she intended. He handed her a small package she had ordered online and smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Sometimes it helps to step outside," he said softly. There was no judgment in his voice, no expectation, just understanding. Sarah felt her lips twitch in a faint smile. She had forgotten what it felt like to be seen without having to justify herself. "Yeah, it does," she admitted, tucking the package under her arm. "Take care," he said simply, and returned to his work. It was a small moment, fleeting, yet it left a warmth lingering in her chest, like sunlight breaking through a cloudy day. Returning home, Sarah noticed Alex sprawled on the couch, scrolling on his phone, headphones in his ears. He barely acknowledged her presence as she moved around the kitchen, preparing tea. She felt a pang of emptiness and frustration, a stark contrast to the spark she had just felt outside. She sat down across from him, her hands wrapped around the warm cup, and spoke, choosing her words carefully. "Alex, we need to talk." He pulled out one earbud, eyes already impatient. "About what?" "About us. About how I feel unseen, ignored, that I'm alone even when you're here." Alex sighed, rubbing his temple. "Sarah, I'm tired. Work is demanding. I'm doing my best. Can we not do this right now?" Her chest tightened. The words, though familiar, cut deeper this time. She had tried before, but now she realized the pattern was unbroken. Her feelings dismissed, her presence undervalued. She nodded silently, swallowing the lump in her throat. Later that night, Sarah sat by the window again, gazing out at the city lights. Her thoughts wandered back to the brief moments of recognition she had received from the delivery driver. It wasn't love, at least. Not yet. But it was a reminder of something she had long forgotten. That being noticed mattered. That kindness could pierce the thickest walls of isolation. The next morning, a small note was slipped into her mailbox at the apartment building, folded neatly. Curiosity and caution mingled as she picked it up. The handwriting was neat, almost meticulous. It simply read, "I hope you're taking care of yourself. Sometimes the smallest acknowledgement can make a difference. No signature, no explanation, just words that reached her more deeply than any conversation with Alex in months. Sarah held the paper close, her eyes misting over. The act was subtle, almost insignificant to anyone else, but to her, it was monumental. Someone had noticed. Someone cared. At breakfast, Alex barely looked up from his coffee, scrolling on his phone. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she carried her cup to the sink. The contrast between the warmth of the note and the cold indifference of her husband's gaze left her heart heavy yet strangely alive. Over the next few days, Sarah found herself looking forward to the small, fleeting interactions outside. The delivery driver's kindness was a quiet anchor in her increasingly tumultuous emotional world. It was a reminder that not all attention had to be monumental to matter. Sometimes a simple acknowledgement was enough to remind a person of their worth. But with this quiet connection came an undeniable tension. She knew the boundaries she had to maintain, the distance she could not cross, yet the ache inside her for genuine recognition grew stronger. It was a delicate balance between the warmth of being seen and the reality of her life, which remained largely unchanging, her husband still blind to her needs. Late one evening, she found herself jotting in a journal she had long neglected. Words flowed more easily than they had in years. I want to feel seen. I want to be acknowledged. I want to matter not just in flashes, but entirely. Is it too much to ask? As she wrote, she realized that the spark she had felt from a stranger's kindness had ignited something inside her. A quiet defiance, a willingness to seek recognition, to demand that her existence mattered. And though the path forward was uncertain, one thing was clear. She would no longer allow herself to fade into invisibility. In the quiet darkness, Sarah whispered to herself, a question lingering in the air. What would you do if you were in my place? She imagined reading the answers, imagining how different her life could feel if others truly saw her. And deep down, she knew she would never stop noticing the difference between being ignored and being seen. The days blurred together in a rhythm that was both monotonous and quietly suffocating. Sarah found herself moving through her life with mechanical precision, preparing breakfast for Alex, ensuring his coffee was just right, smoothing the creases in his work shirt. Yet each act of care was met with minimal acknowledgement, a nod, a muttered thanks that never reached her heart. It was during one of these ordinary mornings that she noticed a pattern in herself she hadn't seen before. She began anticipating the delivery driver's arrival, the sound of his knock, the brief warmth of his gaze. It was an attraction, not in the romantic sense, but a hunger for acknowledgement that she hadn't realized she'd been starving for. One rainy afternoon, she left her apartment slightly earlier, claiming she had errands to run. The streets were slick with rain, and the gray clouds made the city feel like a painting in shades of melancholy. She passed by the convenience store where he usually worked, her heart skipping a beat as she saw him balancing packages in the doorway. "You're out early again," he remarked with a faint smile, noticing her soaked coat. "Yeah, couldn't stay inside anymore," Sarah said, tucking a strand of wet hair behind her ear. "Rain suits you," he said softly, and for a moment she allowed herself to imagine a life where such words were spoken to her often, words that were not empty, not transactional, not distracted words that carried meaning. The interaction was brief, but as she walked away, she felt an unfamiliar weight lift from her chest. The acknowledgement, however small, had fueled her in a way she hadn't expected. It was a reminder that she was more than a shadow moving through her own home, that her emotions were valid, her presence mattered. Returning home, reality hit like a cold gust. Alex was in the living room, eyes glued to his laptop, headphones firmly in place. The hum of the city outside contrasted sharply with the silent disconnect inside their apartment. Sarah set her umbrella aside and poured herself a cup of tea, hands trembling slightly from the residual adrenaline of the encounter outside. She hesitated before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "Alex, we need to talk about us again." He pulled out one earbud, not meeting her eyes. "Can this wait? I have a deadline." Her fingers gripped the mug tighter. "It can't. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not." Alex's sigh was heavy, frustrated. "Sarah, you're overreacting. Everything's fine. I'm just busy, that's all." Her heart sank, but her voice stayed steady, tinged with an edge she hadn't allowed herself before. "Being busy doesn't mean ignoring me. Being married doesn't mean you stop seeing me. I feel invisible, Alex. And it hurts. He waved his hand dismissively and returned to his laptop. The cold indifference in his eyes was a sting she knew too well. She turned away, retreating to the window, seeking solace in the city beyond. That evening, Sarah found herself walking through the drizzle once more, needing to clear her mind. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that encouraged reflection. She thought of the small acts of kindness she had experienced, the brief moments when someone had noticed her sadness without asking for anything in return. They lingered in her mind like embers, warming her from the inside. At the corner store, the delivery driver noticed her before she could approach him. "Back so soon?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his tone. Sarah smiled faintly. "Needed. Another reminder that not everyone ignores me," she said softly. He chuckled, a warm sound that resonated in the chilly evening air. Sometimes, the smallest gestures can matter the most. She nodded, feeling the truth of his words echo in her heart. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel seen not by her husband, but by a stranger whose awareness reminded her of her own worth. Over the next few days, Sarah's thoughts became a delicate dance between desire for acknowledgement and fear of crossing boundaries. She replayed their brief interactions repeatedly, analyzing every word, every glance. Each memory of his kindness was a balm to her weary spirit, yet it also reminded her of the void that existed at home. Late one night, she sat by the window with her journal, hands shaking as she wrote, "I crave attention, but not the kind that demands. I crave recognition, without expectation. I want to feel alive again, to know I still matter. But how do I balance that with loyalty to a man who no longer sees me?" The question lingered, unanswerable, yet necessary. It was the kind of introspection that only comes when a person stands on the edge of realization that their needs are valid, even if they have been ignored for too long. Days later, a small note appeared once again in her mailbox, its neat handwriting familiar. The message was simple. "You deserve to be seen. Don't forget that." Sarah held it close, eyes misting, feeling a strange mixture of comfort and anxiety. The acknowledgement, though subtle, was powerful. She wanted to share it, to discuss it, but she knew the importance of secrecy, of boundaries. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that someone truly noticed her, that someone cared without expectation. As she placed the note in her journal, she whispered the question that had become a constant echo in her mind. What would you do if you were in my place? She imagined reading the answers in the comments, imagining how differently life could feel if recognition came more freely, if small gestures of kindness were never overlooked. And deep within, Sarah knew that this quiet connection, this subtle acknowledgement, was awakening something she hadn't felt in years, a willingness to seek the light in a life that had grown dim, to reclaim her sense of self, piece by piece. The apartment felt colder than usual that morning, though the heater had been running. Sarah moved silently, performing the same rituals she had for months, preparing breakfast, arranging Alex's briefcase, ensuring everything looked perfect. But her heart wasn't in it anymore. Each task felt heavier. Each smile she forced a little more hollow. Alex, absorbed in his work, barely noticed her presence. His phone buzzed incessantly, emails and notifications demanding his attention, leaving no room for her, for conversation, for acknowledgement. Sarah set his plate of food in front of him, hoping for a small word of gratitude. A glance. Anything. "Thanks," he muttered without looking up. It wasn't enough. After breakfast, she retreated to the balcony, a cup of coffee warming her hands. The city below bustled with life, oblivious to her silent despair. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to imagine a world outside her marriage, where small gestures of kindness weren't rare occurrences, but the foundation of daily life. Later that afternoon, a knock at the door drew her attention. She opened it to find the familiar figure of the delivery driver, his jacket slightly damp from the rain. He held a small package. "Another delivery," he said softly, smiling. Sarah took it, noticing the warmth in his eyes, the subtle care in his tone. It wasn't flirtation, it was recognition. It was the simple acknowledgement that someone saw her, truly saw her. "Thanks," she said. And for the first time in weeks, it felt sincere, unburdened. He hesitated, as if sensing the tension in her life. You've seemed distant lately. Everything okay?" The question hit her harder than she expected. Alex never asked. No one in her life asked. And here, a stranger had noticed her silent suffering. She opened her mouth, then closed it, unsure how much to reveal, how much to allow herself to feel seen. "I'm managing," she said finally, a small smile curving her lips. He nodded, but his eyes conveyed understanding. Sometimes, just letting someone notice you makes a difference. That night, after Alex had retreated to his office, she sat alone, replaying the day's interactions in her mind. She couldn't deny the growing impact of these brief moments, small, seemingly insignificant, yet they penetrated the walls of her loneliness like sunlight through a crack in a curtain. Yet guilt gnawed at her. How could she allow herself to feel comfort from someone outside her marriage? Was she betraying herself, her vows, her identity? The questions tumbled through her mind relentlessly, threatening to undo the fragile relief she had felt. Days passed, each one marked by the same routine. Alex's indifference, her quiet yearning for acknowledgement, the small yet powerful moments with the delivery driver. She began to write in her journal more frequently, recording her emotions, her fears, her longings. Each entry was a lifeline, a way to process the growing chasm between her reality and her desires. One evening, she found herself at the corner store again. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the city lights. The delivery driver was closing up, gathering the last boxes for the day. "Back again," he said, a soft smile on his face. Sarah nodded, her coat brushing against the wet pavement. "I just needed to breathe," she admitted. He tilted his head, reading the honesty in her eyes. "You deserve to be noticed, Sarah. Never forget that." The words lingered long after she returned home, echoing in her mind as she watched Alex scroll through his laptop, completely absorbed in his world. The contrast between the warmth of acknowledgement and the coldness of her own home was almost unbearable. That night, Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She reflected on the small gestures that had begun to change her perspective, the fleeting kindness, the recognition without expectation. She thought about her own life, her own worth, and the silent suffering she had endured for so long. Her phone buzzed with a message from the delivery driver, a simple note. "Remember, someone sees you. Always." Her fingers lingered over the screen, a warmth spreading through her chest that she hadn't felt in months. The acknowledgement was a balm, a reminder of her value beyond the neglect she endured daily. She typed back nothing, unsure what to say, and placed the phone beside her. Her mind wandered, thinking about the life she wanted, the respect she deserved, and the small yet profound impact of recognition in a world that often overlooked her. As sleep began to claim her, one thought persisted. What would you do if you were in my place? She imagined her readers writing in the comments, sharing their thoughts, their advice, their empathy. The question had become a part of her, a gentle challenge to consider perspective and courage. Sarah realized she was no longer just surviving. She was slowly awakening, noticing, feeling, and valuing herself. The cracks in her marriage had become more visible, yes, but so had her own strength, her own ability to recognize what she deserved and perhaps to seek it. For the first time in a long while, she understood that acknowledgement, no matter how small or indirect, could ignite a change in a person's life, a realization that she could no longer ignore. The morning light filtered through the curtains, soft yet unwavering. Sarah stood by the window, watching the world awaken below, the city moving in its predictable rhythm. But inside her, a storm had settled, one of clarity, realization, and inevitability. The weeks of subtle recognition from the delivery driver, the small sparks of kindness she had clung to, had built a quiet rebellion inside her heart. She could no longer ignore the truth she had avoided for months. Alex had changed, or rather, his love had eroded into indifference. Alex called from the kitchen, his voice flat, distracted, lacking the warmth it once held. "Coffee's ready," he said. Sarah nodded but didn't move. The moment had come not for confrontation, not for arguments, but for acknowledgement, for her own clarity. She wanted to feel the weight lift from her shoulders, to see herself as she truly was, deserving of attention, respect, and love. Later that day, She found herself walking through the streets, the city buzzing around her, the sounds of life in stark contrast to the silence she had endured at home. She carried with her a sense of purpose that was unfamiliar yet exhilarating. Each step felt deliberate, a rhythm of self-discovery. The delivery driver's words echoed in her mind. You deserve to be noticed. Never forget that. Returning home, Sarah took a deep breath. Alex was absorbed in his work again, the familiar barrier of screens and responsibilities separating them. She realized that waiting for acknowledgement from him was futile. It would never come unless he chose to see her again, and she had already witnessed his choice to remain blind to her needs. In the quiet of the evening, Sarah sat down with her journal. She wrote with a clarity she hadn't felt in years, the ink capturing her pain, her hopes, and her decisions. The truth was undeniable. She had been invisible for too long. Her own value dismissed by the one person who promised to cherish her. But she also recognized the subtle awakening within herself, the strength she had cultivated from being seen by someone who simply acknowledged her existence without expectation. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah began to implement small changes. She dressed for herself, not for Alex. She cooked for herself, not for approval. And she ventured further outside her apartment, connecting with friends, pursuing passions she had neglected. The world began to feel larger, more vibrant, more alive, and she felt alive within it. One rainy afternoon, as she returned from the market, the delivery driver appeared at her door once again. He smiled, a warm and genuine acknowledgement that no words could fully capture. "You're different," he said, noticing the confidence in her posture, the spark in her eyes. Sarah smiled, the weight of months finally easing from her chest. "I've started noticing myself," she replied. It was the simplest statement, yet it held the depth of her transformation. That night, Alex noticed too. He commented casually, "You seem happier lately." But Sarah only nodded, recognizing that happiness was no longer something dependent on him. It was hers earned, claimed, nurtured. As she lay in bed, reflecting on the journey, she realized that life's smallest gestures could ignite the most profound changes. Recognition, kindness, attention when absent, they wound. When present, even briefly, they healed. The delivery driver had given her more than he knew, a mirror to see her worth, a reminder that she deserved to be cherished. Before sleep claimed her, Sarah drafted a message in her mind, imagining how she would share her story with others. What would you do if you were in my place? How would you reclaim your life if someone you loved no longer saw you? She envisioned readers leaving comments, sharing perspectives, advice, empathy. She realized the power of shared experience, of engagement, of connection beyond her apartment walls. The next morning, Sarah packed a small bag. She wasn't running away in haste, nor seeking revenge. She was stepping forward toward herself, her happiness, and the life she had long denied herself. Alex barely noticed, absorbed as ever, and that was exactly how it needed to be. She left a simple note on the kitchen counter. "I've learned to see myself again. I hope you one day see what you had. Goodbye." Walking into the sunlight, Sarah felt a sense of liberation. The city embraced her, the world waiting with open arms for the woman who had finally chosen herself. The memory of the delivery driver's kindness remained, a quiet testament to the power of acknowledgement and human connection. She paused once, looking back at the building that had held her so long in shadows. The choice was clear. She was not lost, not broken, not forgotten. She had awakened. And as she stepped into the world that awaited her, one thought lingered, unshakable and vivid. What would you do if you were in my place? Tell me in the comments. I love to read it.